Yeah, you can start.
Cool. You want to come to your thing? We're up?
All right. Hey,
Hi,
everyone.
everyone. How's it
Hi.
going?
What's up?
We're going to have a quick intro, welcome message from our club president, and then we will get right into the news.
So my name's Gabe, I'm the club president. Welcome to your first ISSessions meeting of the year. So these are... These happen every 2 weeks, Fridays, 7 p.m., where these two gentlemen here just kind of go over the...
Not always me.
Not always these two. Always the beard. Yeah.
This is just a cameo.
Yeah, 99%. Go over the news in the world of security and Infosec and all that stuff, and overall, you're gonna learn a lot. It's a great event. We usually end our nights over the bar across the street. It's a good time. So this is Nick, your program coordinator.
Don't.
Fond of puns, cat pictures, and animal pictures.
Dog pictures.
And
Dog
beard
pictures.
aficionado.
Yeah, and I would argue is the best beard in the room.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's better than Elijah's.
And then this is John, vulnerability researcher at Trend Micro.
Yes.
Yep. And he's here just on Cameo today to help give this presentation. So usually have a guest speaker in.
I'm your guest speaker.
He's the
tonight.
guest speaker today. So I'll let these two gentlemen take it away.
Cool.
All right, so basically usually how this works is we'll spend like the first hour or so kind of going over the, pardon my language, giant clusterfuck of Infosec news for the last little while. Depending on how much news there is, we may go greatly in depth on a particular story because we may not have a lot, but because it's the first of the year, we got lots of stuff to cover, and it's been even a busy past couple of weeks anyways. So now, if this is your first time here, you're new to the program, don't worry if you don't understand anything of what we're talking about. Just absorb the words. It will come eventually. And just by kind of listening to terms and kind of getting an understanding of what we're talking about, you will just absorb stuff, and eventually you will sort of know what's going on. As much as anyone can, right? Even I myself probably will only have a passing knowledge of most of these stories. So don't worry about that. Just absorb and learn, and if you're interested, we share all the links and everything, so you can go and look it up later. All right. So
speaking of which, that's the link on Pastebin.
Yeah, that's the link on Pastebin.
There's more links in there than we will show, because for the bigger stories, we try to find a couple of sources just so you can get alternate opinions on it. But yeah, also because I don't have a Wired subscription, so if I brought those ones up, it would say, hey, your free article count for the month is done.
Fuck Wired.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into it. So, this one, this is the one I can talk about.
Yeah, this one's okay. So I'll talk about the other one.
Okay, you'll talk about the other one, because there's one I can't talk about.
Yeah.
And you'll see why in a second.
Yeah.
Well, in minutes. So anyways, one of the big issues with this whole walled garden of app stores that we have, whether it's Google Play or the Apple App Store, is that every once in a while you get apps in there that are frankly downright malicious. Now, Apple's generally very strict with both macOS and iOS especially, because they really try to protect that platform, but sometimes stuff gets through. Sometimes malicious stuff makes it through. So in this case, I think it was like the number 4 ranked macOS app.
Yep.
Turned out to be
number 4 ranked paid.
Oh, paid app. Turned out to be pretty malicious. Basically just sending huge quantities of data from your laptop to China, which is always good.
Yeah. Stuff like your browser history, some user information, stuff like that.
Yeah. So there was a security researcher that discovered it, and so the biggest issue here was that the time frame from when he alerted Apple to when Apple actually responded and eventually took down the offending app was really kind of bad. It was not a great turnaround time, and I mean, who knows how many people were downloading and actually shelling out money for an app that was basically just completely harvesting huge quantities of their data, and who knows how much of that is potentially sensitive or could be used to further compromise that user in some way. So,
people shelled out $5 a pop too for that privilege.
And there's some weird stuff. The there was some suggestions that like the developer's name was some sort of weird reference to like a Chinese serial killer, and like just kind of very strange. But yeah, so even if it's on an app store, you got to be careful. Most sort of like, I guess, I don't know, cleaner tools, if it's not from a reputable company, and even then, sometimes things happen.
Which we'll talk about later.
I won't.
I will talk about later.
But yeah, so generally try to stick to reputable brands, and I think it tends to be okay. What's up next? Oh yeah, so this was
Controversial. So
yeah,
if you heard about the WannaCry outbreak, or ages ago the hack on Sony, and a number of recent breach attempts on banks in India, you may have heard that the US government sort of eventually attributed, along with some of the incident response organizations out there, the attacks to either China or North Korea. Eventually, I think it was last year, the US said, yeah, we're pretty sure it was North Korea that at least did WannaCry, and we think maybe the Sony attack as well. So like earlier in the month, the US federal government eventually came out and fingered an individual, which is like unheard of. They pointed out a single security person, saying that this is the culprit, we're adding this person to our most wanted list. Obviously they're a North Korean national.
So good luck with that.
Yeah, they do claim that this person was in charge of a larger group of people, but the fact that they outed a single person is not common practice. And so a lot of people called this out and were wondering, because likely they were doing it at the behest or the request of their government. It doesn't make their actions legal, but the fact that a single spy or a single person would get pointed out is
something like this has happened in recent time. I don't recall what breaches or hacking it was in relation to, but I believe there was like something that 4 Chinese nationals that were something similar was done maybe a year or 2 ago, if I'm not mistaken. So this isn't really, I wouldn't say it's unprecedented. It's rare for sure, but it's not unprecedented that they would actually name someone, publish a photo and all this kind of stuff. Now, you can get into all sorts of sort of crazy philosophical discussions about, if you live in a repressive regime like North Korea, how much control do you really have over what you're being told to do, that kind of stuff. So, it's tricky. But I mean, he's in North Korea. It's not like he's going anywhere.
He's not getting extradited anywhere anytime soon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't
yeah,
know.
well, and this is the other thing, right? I'm sure the information going into North Korea is pretty limited. So, it's entirely possible that, hey, they're right. This was the guy responsible for it. But now they're pissed he somehow got caught. And, well, we know what happens there. So, yeah.
But interesting that they eventually fingered somebody over this. There was a bit of fallout as well. So you may be aware that there's a British security researcher that goes by Malware Tech Blog, who was arrested last year in Las Vegas at the Infosec conferences for his suspected creation of the WannaCry malware outbreak. Well, so this kind of should exonerate him. But
actually, it was for a completely different banking Trojan. Which is
that they said was the Genesis virus that gave rise to the WannaCry stuff. So that's the condition that they're still holding him on. They say, well, you wrote an older piece of malware that got used to create this piece of malware, so we're still going to hold you.
Wasn't that original Genesis, or wasn't that hacked from the Pentagon itself?
Well, we have to make the distinction between the exploit, which is what gets you in the front door, and the payload is what you do once you're in the front door.
Yeah.
So their accusation is not necessarily about. So WannaCry was unique in that it was the first widespread thing to use that exploit that came from the allegedly came from NSA tools, right? But the payload they're talking about. So what it actually does once it's in, that's what they're saying he sort of contributed code to, right? And again, when we say contributed code, I mean, people publish code online all the time. So if someone takes code that you wrote and then uses it to do something nefarious, are you responsible for that?
Yeah.
Like, what if you wrote like the most trivial thing? Like, okay, if you guys follow any like Node package manager drama and the fact that people literally write Node libraries to tell someone if a number is even or not. Which, again, I mean, you learn this kind of stuff in like intro to programming in maybe like your first 2 weeks of class, You learn how to do this, so you don't need like a library,
software
to
library.
do this, right? So, you know, in that case, like if someone used that library to tell if a number was even or not in a piece of malicious software, would the person who wrote that ridiculous library be responsible? I really highly doubt it.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of where all that argument goes.
Yeah, a lot of security researchers and stuff like that write tools that get used by good.
Metasploit.
Yeah.
Metasploit is probably one of the best known tools around, and you know,
Nmap
gets
mass
used
scan,
all the time.
like all the network scanning tools.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. So
Okay.
I'm going to talk about this one.
I'm
Because John-
I'm legally obligated not to talk about
Yeah,
this one
'cause he
because
might
it
work there.
happens to concern my employer.
Yeah. Well, the parent company of your.
No, employer.
Oh, yeah,
Straight
okay, yeah,
employer.
no, that's fair. So, we were talking about apps that found their way onto the App Store and that were then subsequently removed. Apparently, Trend Micro had a couple of security scanning tools and health check tools that were apps on the App Store that were found to be collecting information about some browsing history of the user, encrypting it, packaging it, and then sending it off to a server for analysis. Now, there could be a lot of legitimate reasons why they were doing that, right? If, for example, their software detected that you had some piece of like malicious JavaScript download as part of your web browsing activity, they may want to record the types of sites that are distributing that material, right? So it's understandable why like even a reputable company may do that, but people took issue with the fact that that was happening, maybe without their knowledge, right? You maybe think that these security tools are just scanning stuff locally and they're getting their intelligence from other sources. So that was the concern that a lot of people have. It's unclear right now whether it was Apple or Trend Micro that took the tools down. At least it
Apple.
was it Apple?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because the article at the time didn't say, but yeah. So again, just even keeping conscious of the apps and software that you use. Again, it can even be from a reputable vendor. It could even be that this vendor purchased another company or purchased intellectual property from another company to build into their own products. And you know, maybe through no fault of their own development team, there were unintended consequences to the piece of software that they use. So the whole notion of your software tool chain, or your, what do they call it? Your, you know, the chain, the assembly line.
CI/CD pipeline.
No.
You want to go that detailed?
No, what's it called? Shoot, I can't.
Your
Your
SPLC?
supply chain. In terms of your technologies that you use inside your organization, you have to be conscious of all the parts inside that and look at what they're talking to and who they're talking to. And it can be kind of an onerous task, but it's important that we keep those things in mind. Now, before John gets in trouble, we're going to move right along. There's a lot of articles recently about voting security and voting tech, so I thought we should talk about it for a couple minutes. Every cryptography-related secure voting tech researcher out there all says, don't use tech to do voting. They all say, use paper ballots and scanners. Use that, because everything else is garbage or difficult to work with or has vulnerabilities. The idea is that you're locking a person in a booth where no one can see them with the technology. So, you know, if there's like a little door or cupboard in front of the PC that's running the voting software, you know, I can open it and plug in a USB stick and compromise the votes. Right? That's generally the case that all of the experts on voting security out there are saying. And they're starting to disseminate this information in light of the upcoming midterm elections in the United States. But they're getting some pushback from some of the states. Georgia, for example, saying there's no way we could go back to doing votes by paper ballot. They're saying, you know, we've rolled out the voting technology across the whole state. It would cost us too much money. We don't have the people to do it. We just couldn't feasibly do this. So herein lies the problem.
Now, the flip side of that, so where a lot of this has kind of come from is for the last 2 years at the DEF CON conference, they've had basically like an election or like a voting machine hacking village. Now, there's several completely valid arguments kind of coming in response, some of which are, for example, that these guys are buying old decommissioned voting machines off of eBay, which aren't reflective necessarily of the current technology or the current software builds that are present on these machines. The other thing that is also a completely valid sort of rebuttal is that the actual environment in which these voting machines are put, whether like the network and the protections that are in place, would in many cases mitigate some of the problems. So this is the thing, is when we talk about vulnerabilities, and especially when we get into sort of scarier stuff like, hacking elections or hacking industrial stuff, the one that's flying around today is, gas pipelines. When we start talking about that kind of stuff, you have to understand that even if that one particular system, if you had direct access to it, would be trivially hackable by like a 12-year-old, that 12-year-old would never get anywhere near it in the first place because of all these other controls in place to kind of stop that from ever happening. And probably 10, 20 levels of fail-safes to go along with that. Now, that's not to say election equipment is that resilient by any stretch of the imagination, because frankly, no one's going to immediately die from the results of an election, although you could argue long term that might happen. Yeah. But I'm not going to try and get political here.
We're going to keep away from the politics.
So anyways, so there's valid points on both sides, but the reality is that especially, I think for most, openly democratic societies right now, it's very clear that there are outside influences making attempts to try and influence or directly change the results of elections. So these are things we need to be prepared for, we need to be aware of. But that's not to say that oh my goodness, every election is going to be completely hacked by the Russians. So take it with a grain of salt, but it's interesting to follow. And again, it's I think it's a fairly new area.
Yeah,
in general,
definitely. The reason John said 12-year-old is because this year at the DEF CON Hacking Village, it was actually a 12-year-old with a pen lid that compromised a voting booth. So yeah, that's all it takes, lid of a pen. It got into the machine and messed it up. This is interesting. This is more of a general story about behaviors in just end user environments and phishing scams and stuff like that. So first off, email scamming and phishing is not going away. They just change tactics from time to time. So we're going to see one of the tactics that's showing a lot of financial return for the bad guys soon. But this article is all about who the most targeted people in an organization are right now with phishing scams and which departments fall for it the most. Turns out it's places like finance, HR, and IT, interestingly enough. And I think that's a little bit counterintuitive. But apparently, phishing the IT people is working quite well. What's even more interesting, and what the headline of this article is kind of alluding to, is that as IT or technology people, we might feel that we're a little more resistant to this kind of stuff than other people. So when the IT folks get scammed or phished, they are less likely to report that they were phished to the security team or executive management and stuff like that. They're less likely than other departments in the company, maybe because there's a bit of embarrassment associated with the fact that they clicked a phishing email. As a tangent, just to everybody out there, we've all clicked a phishing email in our lives. If you haven't yet, you will. The best social engineering experts in the world who are masters at manipulating people, they get phished. So if the guy that runs the social engineering capture the flag contest at DEF CON every year, if he can get phished, which he did 2 years ago, freaking anybody is vulnerable to this stuff. I have totally clicked on stuff when it says my Amazon shipment is going to be late. I freak and I click before I think. So it's fine, whatever. So that's where all your other layers of security come in place to protect you, right?
And the other thing is there's sort of a pretty consistent mentality from kind of the IT world and especially the security world that user shaming and user blaming is a really big thing, and it has been kind of since information security was a thing. So the thing is someone who works in IT who may in themselves engage in shaming those stupid users. Why do they just click on anything, right? For them to then fall for that adds that extra layer of shame because of all the hypocrisy of yelling at users, when again, like Nick said, anyone can get hit by this because there are some really, really, really crafty, smart people who know how to manipulate people out there. So it's
so if you ever find yourself in charge of your company's IT security program and the education and awareness component, tell your users it's fine. We're not going to get mad at you if you click on a phishing link. It's more important that you tell us so that we can mitigate any damage that happens because of you clicking on a phishing link.
Yeah, that's a big important thing for security culture, is that we all screw up, we all click on bad things, we all download bad things. It happens. Please report it as soon as it happens. We will not be mad, we promise.
Yeah. John downloads really bad things.
on purpose.
Yeah. This one's interesting. So someone discovered an interesting kind of attack within the Mac OS environment. Now, this is a type of exploit or attack that would be used after someone's already gained access to your machine. So it's not a super big threat. What it is a privilege escalation type vulnerability, meaning if I get access to your machine as a regular user but I want to become the administrator, I could use one of these techniques. And it's neat because it has to do with the way that Safari reads URLs out of the address bar. And apparently there's a way to leverage that to elevate your privilege. Because apparently at the back end of Safari, depending on the type of document you want to open in Safari, if it's not just a straight HTML document, it might farm that activity out to another part of the macOS operating system. And the researcher found in there that there's a way to give it a certain URL that will then be run by a more privileged part of the macOS operating system that would then give them administrative level access to the machine. Just a cool vulnerability. I don't know where, like, there's patches for it. I just thought it was neat that someone figured out a way to make the URL actually elevate privilege. Kind of cool. That's all.
Yep.
Yeah, this one was interesting. Speaking of downloading interesting material. So there was an app out there for people that are into the whole BDSM thing to meet other people who are into that same thing. Whatever, different strokes. But what happened is, unfortunately, this app was storing all the passwords in plain text. And someone found that out and found out that it was possible to pull the passwords of people who were connecting to and using this service because the app wasn't storing the passwords safely and securely. It makes me really upset that, like, these days we still haven't solved the don't store passwords in plain text problem, but apparently really popular web apps can still have that problem.
And so for those of you that aren't aware, the proper way to store passwords is in such a way that you can never actually recover the password from the way that they store it. All you can do is someone types in a password and it does this one-way transformation, and then you check that transformed version of the password to what you have stored. If it's a match, great, let them in. If it's not a match, you don't let them in. But there's no possible way to actually recover that password in any reasonable amount of time. And so you'll kind of know if a website's not doing this if, like, you say, let's say you go to recover your password and they send you your actual password in text, then you know you should probably stop using that site or yell at them or make sure your password is not the same as it is anywhere else, because that's, yeah.
Yep.
What was that website where you actually post like a shame website? I can't remember. There's a website where you go.
Yeah.
And people are actually post screenshots of, like, if you reset the password and it comes to you in plain text, you actually take a screenshot and post.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
I forget what it's called.
I know what you're talking about. I can't remember the site off the top of my head.
Plain text shame.
Yes,
Yeah.
something of that sort.
Yeah.
I'm sure Googling those terms would probably show it pretty quickly.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah, if a service that you use ever sends you your password when you request a password reset, stop using that service.
Or if you call into their support people and they, like, tell you your password or something ridiculous like that. I have had this happen a long time ago in the past.
Yep.
Yeah, bad.
Yep.
I'm pretty sure our Sheraton site does that.
Oh yeah.
it might-
So
Speaking
funny,
of-
so funny story.
Oh, really?
Funny story.
It'd be really funny.
A family member of mine has
Let me get my popcorn.
actually encountered this exact thing. It's been going around Canada and in general, kind of all over. So essentially, what happened was like 2014. LinkedIn got owned really bad. Like hundreds of millions of accounts were leaked. Tens of millions? Not hundreds of millions? Okay. Well, anyways.
That's Yahoo.
Millions. Oh yeah, I'm thinking Yahoo. So basically, a whole ton of LinkedIn accounts were dumped from the LinkedIn database, including, like, sort of just like name, email, password hashes, which were recovered, and they were pretty weak. But essentially, what's happening is that the attackers are going through this list, and they're basically saying they're taking the person's username on LinkedIn, which is not necessarily their actual name; it's just a username, and they are sending these people an email that says, "I know your password is your username," and they're betting on the fact that a lot of people will use their alias or their online username as some component of their passwords, or they'll use that password for some things as well, which obviously is a bad practice, but people do it and they're banking on that. So what they do is they say I know your password is this, and they basically claim after saying I know your password, and even if it's not their password and they don't use it as a password anywhere, they're like, how does this person know this piece of information about me? So they lead with a piece of information that the person is like, I have no idea how this person knows this. This is just this random person emailing me. And then they follow up right after and they say, I've hacked your computer. I've recorded you on webcam and audio watching porn. And I am going to send this to every single one of your contacts unless you pay me $5,000 in Bitcoin. And I was at work, and I got a frantic phone call from a family member. And yeah, it took me about an hour to talk them down. And this is like the problem. So, you know, everyone in this room is generally going to be pretty tech savvy, likely isn't going to go hunting through their junk folder and find something like this and immediately think it's legit. But you know, this particular family member was going through their junk folder, found this thing, and because of that one piece of information that they thought was private to them and they thought that no one else knew, everything else they took as being legitimate, right? Which is a really, really common social engineering tactic. So, yeah, it's like real people are falling for this in large quantity. You can understand why, and for the average person that is not, you know, doesn't have this level of savvy to be able to understand that, like, you know, hey, some of your information has leaked out on the internet, but you do not all of it, and you don't have to worry about stuff like that. Yep. So yeah, it basically took me about an hour to actually talk them down to just saying, just delete it, ignore it, you're fine, everything's okay. No one's got videos of you watching porn, you're good. It's going around, and they're using the LinkedIn hack, and yeah, you can bet that they're going to use future breaches to do similar stuff, because they wouldn't keep doing it if they weren't getting a payoff from it.
So earlier in the summer is when this campaign started, and folks have tracked the Bitcoin addresses that were supplied to the victims to pay, so they can kind of estimate how much money this group has made, because the whole Bitcoin journal is publicly auditable, right? So they figure this group has already made in the tens of millions of dollars from running this scam on people. Because again, depending on, you know, your personal circle, your contact list, some of this stuff for some people would be like a life and death kind of matter if they felt that this information got out, right? So yeah, it's really unfortunate that it's working, but yeah.
But yeah, like the one thing, me saying, you know, my family member knowing what I do fully, me saying it wasn't what got them to calm down. There was a CBC story that highlighted this whole thing in great detail. She was like, oh, the email was even the same words as the one that I got, and then they were fine. Yeah. But before that, they didn't really fully. So this is not strictly InfoSec, but this is just kind of an IT and, you know, I guess digital rights management kind of thing. Yeah. And it's kind of shitty. So really shitty of Apple to do this. So basically what happened was someone, a Canadian, you know, bought some movies on iTunes and was going to go and watch them. And they bought them, you know, several years ago. They went back to watch it and like, what the hell? It's not there. I know I bought this. I have like the emails that say I bought this. Goes to Apple support. Apple support says, yeah, so the content, the publisher of this content has made it no longer available. There's nothing we can do. We're really sorry, but how about 2 free rentals on us? So, and when those movies cost like $25 a pop, you know, around there, maybe 10 if you got it on sale, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you 2 $5 rentals. Because, hey, it's not our fault. It's the content owner that decided to take it down.
So the user was livid and started tweeting about it. There was a pretty long tweet storm.
I think they got offered more rentals.
Yeah, they eventually upped it to like 4 rentals because they doubled it.
Yeah.
But the guy still was trying to make the point that, like, no, I bought these. You told me I had them. And the support person kept saying, no, we basically we facilitate giving you the license to watch these as long as the content provider is allowing us to host this content. So they equated it to Apple is simply the storefront acting as a reseller, but what they're not selling you is a product. What they are selling you is a license that can be revoked at any time from the original content provider. So, you know, people started hopping onto the thread suggesting really the only media service you should use is any that actually allows you to download an offline copy of the material that you can prove will be sort of retrieved or pulled back at a later date by the
Do you know how
the
many
owner
of
of
those,
the copyright.
Do you know how many of those there are for movies and TV shows?
Very few.
A whole zero.
Yeah. Yeah.
Legit
Yeah.
ones.
Yeah. Well, there's
Legit.
a free one. It's called Pirate Bay.
That's why I said
Yeah.
legit.
Yeah.
That's the qualifier.
Totally, and there's some that you might not realize it, but that are kind of like borderline. So, for example, does anybody?
Steam.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Does anybody have a Steam account? And do you have game purchases on Steam? Yeah, I have a huge friggin' Steam library. Now, in theory, I could download all the games, and you can do like an offline backup of them. So, if I did that to my whole library, yes, I could play my Steam games offline, even if a publisher eventually pulled their library from Steam.
How many of them are integrated right into Steam though?
Yeah, quite a few of them, and also, I mean, you can still launch them from the native executable. Though.
Yeah.
But I have to do that in the first place, right? If I never did that, and that content provider pulled all the material from Steam, I might
I
not
don't
be
have
able to
enough
get
money
access
to
it.
buy hard drives to back up 450 games.
Yeah.
So
About that, that has happened to one of my games, but
Yeah.
not in that way. What Steam does is they remove any future purchases. They do keep
The pre-purchased?
if you've already purchased it, they do keep it valid, at least
Sure.
for that copy, until Steam itself disappears off the map, and then I looked into it, and they give you like a month to download as much as you possibly want,
Yep.
and then you can no longer download anything after that.
Yes.
So this is the thing is that could change at any time.
It could.
They could, in theory, just say, "Hey, by the way, you know those games we said you were going to have access to? Yeah, that's done." With no notice, and just say, "Yep." So yeah, this particular publisher is pulling all their games from our platform. You can no longer download them. You no longer have a license for them. We're just the storefront.
Yep.
We can't do anything about it, right? So it's scary because I have a huge Steam library. I think I'm over 450 now.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, like imagine someone walking into a house when you used to have a big DVD collection and taking them all and going, nope, you can't have these anymore.
So I can definitely say, like, if you can support publishers that give you DRM-free versions of games, that kind of stuff. Some publishers will give you, if you buy it on Steam, they'll also let you download a DRM-free version of it, which is fantastic. We like those kind of guys. Yeah.
This is another interesting, kind of more HR-ish related one. This one article was talking about people that try to sidestep security controls to be more productive at their job to avoid all that frustrating IT security stuff. Now, yes, we recognize in our industry that sometimes we put unnecessary burdens on end users. But once it's in place and the company said it's okay, people should darn well follow that policy. If they sidestep it, they're violating a policy, and that's not a good thing because you're introducing risk into the company and stuff like that. So this article was mostly just talking about how, a lot of users know tricks to get around a lot of the stuff that we might deploy inside of an organization, like using VPNs to bypass services to access to sites they want. And while we acknowledge that sometimes we make things more difficult for people, that doesn't still give them license to do this, right? They're still introducing risk, and it's still a bad thing
Unless
to do.
they're the CEO and they yell a lot, then let them do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah. Okay. Next time
Right?
you clean ransomware off a CEO's machine, let me know.
Yeah.
So just, again, something to keep in mind. Especially, who the worst people for this tend to be? Again, is technology people. We know all the tricks. We know how to do VPN stuff. We know how to get around stuff. That makes us a great big security risk. Let's not be that person, because you don't want to be the one who is responsible for the bad thing. Okay, this is a bit of an older article, but I had to bring it up because I can't believe that Belkin is still having this problem. So these Belkin smart power strip bars were found to be exploitable, which then allows bad guy to pivot from the exploited power strip into the rest of your network. So the fact that your power strip is Wi-Fi enabled, whatever, we're over the fact that IoT sucks now. Like, we've ranted about it so much, we have to accept that the consumer industry is going to shove Wi-Fi into everything. Deal with it. We have to figure out mitigations around it, but the fact that it's the Belkin Wemo, okay? This product in all of its different incarnations, every single time they release something, there's a brand new remote vulnerability for it. One of our alumni, the first time he ever went to Sector, sat down at the IoT security booth and popped a Belkin Wemo switch in about a half an hour. And he gave them the disclosure report, and they said, okay, we're totally going to fix it. And every time they release a new switch, it's all broken all over again. So it's frustrating.
Everything old is new again.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So like the funny thing about IoT, and anytime there's sort of like a new class of products that run software on them, for people that have been in the industry for a long time, they kind of start getting deja vu, because you get all these old types of vulnerabilities that we thought in like mainstream software we had fixed like 10, 15 years ago, and now because of, there are legitimate constraints in terms of how you have to write the software, the kind of complexity you can put in these, and you can't necessarily put in hefty amounts of encryption and that kind of stuff due to power reasons, right? Yeah. But you have very trivial things like a buffer overflow, and buffer overflows still exist, but they are super hard to exploit. They are really incredibly difficult on like a Windows 7, a Linux machine, Mac. They're really tremendously difficult to fully exploit. But on these things, they don't have all of the fancy nifty protections, because they're just trying to keep the code as small and as functional as possible, right? So, yeah. So, if you're wanting to get into like bug bounties or vulnerability research, go buy some cheap crap off AliExpress or Amazon, anything that has a Wi-Fi chip in it, and poke around with it. You will probably find something. Yep. Chances are.
Yeah, we had a good presentation at one of our club meetings during the summer from, again, one of our previous capstone groups who did this for their capstone. They bought a bunch of stuff, and they found vulnerabilities in it, and they documented it all and talked about it. It was a good session. So, yeah, anybody can do this stuff. This is the first in a trio. We're not going to talk about them in too much detail, but there was like 3 botnet operators that got arrested recently and sent to jail. That just makes me feel good on the inside, because these people are the scum of the internet, next to the people who run the illegal stuff. But botnet people are so annoying and frustrating. So one guy who operated a big botnet out of Russia, he got put away for a while. Then a 19-year-old...
This one was hilarious.
Yeah, then a 19-year-old who was running a great big botnet operation out of the UK also got put away, and this guy was funny because he was calling out Brian Krebs.
He was a little shit.
He was.
So it's really nice to see people like that put away.
Yep.
Yeah, he basically just mouthed off constantly like, he's never going to get caught, you're never going to find me. He was taunting Brian Krebs, and if you don't know, Brian Krebs is, in my opinion, one of the best like investigative reporters in the information security world. And so, yeah, it was, it's funny, he got nailed for bomb threats, but,
he happened to be a big botnet operator.
He happened to be a big botnet operator, with a high-profile big botnet operator, which is not usually something you want.
No.
But, I guess when you're when you're 19 and making boatloads of money.
And then...
That explains itself right there.
Yeah. The facial expression just doesn't match the haircut there, but...
It looks a little like lava.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Hope he's watching this stream. The third operator who got busted was out of Washington. So one in the UK, one in Washington, one in Russia. It's good to see that law enforcement agencies around the world are shutting these people down, because they are jerk stores. And that's all. I just wanted to point out that they were finally getting caught, some of them. That's great. The third person another prison story. The third person in the gang of people who released all the celebrity nude photos has been sent to jail for 8 months. The previous 2 people, I think, were already sentenced.
Yeah.
So they finally got this third guy and sent him away as well. So, yeah. Don't do crimes. Like, what's wrong with people? The regular InfoSec world just pays way better than doing crimes anyways. So, yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah. Well, most of the time.
Sometimes.
Yeah. So this is interesting. So the newest version of Chrome is out. Was it this year that Google was celebrating, or like a couple of months ago, or this month? The 10th anniversary of Google Chrome.
Weeks ago. 10th
Yeah.
anniversary. Yeah.
So that's cool. And apparently as part of that, one of them kind of released a statement. One of the devs was like, it's really great, but we'd like to figure out a way of getting rid of the URL bar. because for a lot of users, it's a bizarre thing. Like they don't understand all the components of it. It's something that presents a huge attack surface. It's the way a lot of malicious like links and stuff gets injected. They were demonstrating right here that, for example, this URL was not apple.com. It was this. That's what that URL actually was if you clicked on it, but this is what it was showing up in the address bar. So again, just trying to make the point that this stuff is a bit of a nightmare to deal with. So they're trying to figure out what's something else we could do in place of the URL bar. It's just an ongoing conversation, and I thought it was an interesting point to bring up. If we could replace that with something different, could we do something to help mitigate the complexity of the address bar and of the attack surface that it presents to users? I don't know.
And honestly, like when they say, oh, we want to replace the URL, it's like saying we want to replace passwords. And your answer is, with what?
Yeah.
And you put a bunch of smart people in a room for like an hour, and they're not going to come up with a damn thing,
No.
to be honest with you.
Eventually someone will, though.
Pat?
Just, yeah.
Well, replacing the URL bar is almost like saying, think of something else like a path, tree, file structure.
Yeah.
Well, but also domains, right? Domains are probably the more critical part, right? Because that's when we're getting these weird, like, Unicode typo squatting domains that look like apple.com and can be easily used in a phishing email or whatever, right? And when you see it in the bar, right, So, the file paths and stuff like that, like, whatever, but it's that domain part, that host name part that's so critical, because that's the server you're connecting to at that point, right?
But you're
so
right.
What do you do?
It's because the domain is the identity of the thing you want to connect to, right?
Yeah.
Like, how do I say I want to go to like IKEA.com without saying IKEA, without
We
having to type
could go
IKEA?
back to AOL rooms and CompuServe rooms. AOL keywords. Let's go
AOL,
back to that.
Yeah,
Does anyone remember? Is anyone as old as me and Nick that can remember AOL and CompuServe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It used to be that
at
when-
least there's a couple. Of
Yeah, when they advertised a movie, right at the end of the movie trailer, they gave you the AOL keyword you had to type into your AOL bar to bring you to the
like
website.
take you to like this room on AOL,
Yeah,
right?
to talk about the thing.
Yeah.
It was interesting.
Yeah.
Very weird. Yeah, so I don't know. If you think of that, tell Google. They'll appreciate it. They might give you money. This
And a
is
job.
yeah, probably a job. Part of a larger conversation about browser extensions and do we need them? Are they insecure? Do they cause problems? But apparently someone figured out how to write some JavaScript that talked to the Mega Uploads browser extension, or whatever, just the Mega extension, not Mega Uploads anymore, whatever it is. And they were able to basically talk to that extension to then steal users' passwords. It's a thing. It's kind of like the apps discussion we were having earlier. Browser extensions are just pieces of code written by somebody. They can be vulnerable. They can be talked to. They can be spoken to with JavaScript.
So
They present it.
And the other thing about every once in a while you'll hear someone say the browser is the new operating system. So if you think back like 10, 15 years when we used computers, you would use a different program for basically everything. For your email, you'd have like Outlook Express in like the Windows 95 days or whatever. You'd have a web browser, but you'd have like different client programs for doing different things. Everything's in your browser now. All your email, your whole life, all your chat programs, everything.
I don't use like Microsoft Office anymore. I do everything in Google Docs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. And if you think of Chrome OS, like with Chromebooks, they're almost exclusively web-based for everything you do on there. They don't really support like native applications that run directly on. So yeah, so anytime you can inject code into someone's browser by way of a browser extension, you basically own their life at that point. Let's be real.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's be careful what extensions you install.
Yep.
Okay.
This mobile spyware maker.
So there's been a lot. So there's been a few hackers going around, a few teams of hackers going around, basically targeting spyware companies. So like commercial spyware companies. What we mean by that is companies that market stuff to spy on your spouse, spy on your kids. Make sure they're not doing bad things. Make sure your spouse isn't cheating on you. All that kind of stuff. And I mean, it's a really shady business. A lot of this stuff is frequently used by abusers in abusive relationships as a method of control. So these guys really are they're facilitating sort of some of the worst behaviors, some of the worst human behaviors. So it's kind of nice to see. There's one side of it which it's nice to see these guys getting owned, and people are sort of exposing them for the fact that they don't really give a shit about the users that they're helping spy on, and B, that like, this is bad. Look at all the information that they're collecting on you.
Yeah.
The bad thing, obviously, is that when they start leaking records, the people the victims of this really are the people who get hurt, unfortunately.
Yeah. So what happened was their web application that they manage, there was a database component to it, and they had the database sitting exposed to the internet, which is fine if you know how to lock down a database. They didn't even have authentication on the database. So anybody could just connect to the database that managed all their customer accounts and start querying data. It was completely unauthenticated. So that's how people pulled the passwords and the details.
There's been a previous one, maybe even a couple weeks previous, where they had like a key to get access to the database, and it was stored directly in the application. Someone reverse engineered the application a little bit, and hey, look, there's the key. They used that to start sort of sending random calls to try and get information, and voila, they could dump everything. They had full access to every single customer's information on there. So yeah.
This was neat. Apparently Google has initiated a secret relationship with MasterCard where they can buy your purchase history from MasterCard.
It's not secret anymore.
No, not secret anymore. Because I guess Google just needs to know everything. They're the people that would buy that spy program.
Yeah, they would.
Yeah.
So
that's true. They do know everything already. But
yeah, you have to look at any of these big, Google, Facebook, Amazon, whatever. Where's their money really come from? Google's still huge chunks of their revenue come from advertising and advertising-related activities. Yep. And how do you do better advertising? Well, you collect as much information as possible and apply all these crazy algorithms and machine learning to that information to then be able to creepily stalk you around the internet and show you ads for things
that have already bought,
that you maybe were thinking about.
Yeah, but then.
Just because if anyone's truly interested, Google gives zero craps if you actually want to know about that, because you can find every single one of their all the code on Google, because they will really give it to you. Because
they'll let you download your own data set.
No,
Of course.
Of course. You can find out exactly what they do because they have all their policies and all.
Yeah,
of course.
They're very open about it.
If you're a lawyer and you feel like reading 800 pages of legalese.
I actually had to do that for a court. So that was fun. Where I actually found out how they go about it.
Yeah.
Which is Facebook. They went and just gave the data to.
Well.
No, I had to go and figure this one out because they went to. Okay, so Facebook gave the data to the advertisers.
Yep.
Google goes about it in a different way, which isn't anywhere better, but it sort of is.
This is what they say.
When I looked at their I can't remember what to call it anymore because I've lost the terminology in my head. All the licenses that they currently have, all the
like all the data sharing agreements and things like that.
They don't give it to the advertisers. They let the advertisers buy.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Yeah.
Purchase history is also very valuable because they can justify the cost. They can say if they get credit card information, they know what the purchase. They can say our ads.
That's what advertising is all about, right? Yeah. Advertising is about turning people who are browsing into buyers, right? At the end of the day, that's all they care about is if you buy shit.
Yep.
So for them, it's kind of a no-brainer, but at the same time, okay, they have all their policies and stuff here, but what they're doing with other companies and what data they're buying and sharing from other companies, they don't necessarily have to disclose that to you.
While we're picking on Google, they got in trouble a couple of weeks ago for people found out that when you turn off location sharing in Android, it doesn't necessarily turn off all the location sharing. So it turns out that the app is still taking geolocation timestamps of where you happen to be at certain times. It's just not sharing that with a lot of the apps installed, but Google still has it. So they got in a little bit of trouble with that, but they said, no, if you read the stuff, it says we can still do that. So they're kind of jerks. While we continue to talk about Google, why not?
But good things.
I must have I don't know, sorted this by name or something. So if you know what what's the other one called?
YubiKey.
A YubiKey is. It's a little hardware key. John's probably got one on his keychain. It's a two-factor hardware authentication system that you can plug into your machine, and when something asks for your login creds, you can touch it with your finger, and it logs you in. Turns out these are really effective at mitigating phishing attacks and stuff like that. And
Google as an organization deploys these company-wide.
yeah, so they're now giving this they developed this internally, and they gave it to all their employees, and noticed something ridiculous, like a 90%. No, it was even better than that. Once they deployed it, they didn't have any successful phishing attacks against them. Pardon me? Yeah, it was like 100. Like it was an unreal success story.
And a big part of that is the fact that you have to physically touch it to actually perform the login, right? If something is plugged in, an attacker can still potentially leverage that, but if you have to physically touch it and it will not release its code without you touching it, what's an attacker on the other side of the world going to do?
Yeah.
Right?
So they realized this was awesome. They've developed their own in-house one that they are now selling to the public for $50 a pop. Now, I have seen some hardware teardowns of this. People are saying it's pretty flimsy compared to the YubiKey. They say the YubiKey is a better product, but now because Google's offering this one, YubiKey now has a pretty big name competitor. However you want to go about it, these things are great. The YubiKeys usually go on sale, especially on Amazon
Friday.
Prime Day and Prime Day. You can get like 2-for-1 deals because it's always good to have a second copy of one of these things. Because if you lose a hardware token, you've lost your login token. So always have a backup. Yeah, that's so that you can do like the proximity thing. So if I bring my phone within a certain distance of it, it will always just stay logged in as long as I can talk to my phone.
The YubiKeys have there's I think it's the YubiKey Neo has NFC capabilities. So so you can actually use it directly on certain phones where you can actually just tap to do the second factor login. Yeah. Different mechanisms, because on a phone you can't plug in like a USB device on your phone typically, right? So they are making different ways of still being able to use that fob easily.
Yeah, they are useful. They're good things to have.
Yeah. Okay. This is my realm.
Go for it.
Okay, so any of you guys familiar with Tor? Okay, so basically it's a way to try and really anonymize your browsing on the internet. Essentially how it works is they call it Tor. It stands for the onion router, and what it does is it basically wraps your request in a bunch of layers like an onion. And then each time it gets sent, someone peels back another layer of the onion, and that layer of the onion says, okay, send it here. And then the other layer says, okay, send it here. And only one place, what's called the exit node, knows your final destination. So those exit nodes will actually get you out onto the internet. Now, Tor is sort of known and is sort of touted as a way to bypass repressive regimes where there's a lot of monitoring, blocking. China, Iran. Sorry. Yeah, North Korea is probably even tougher, even with Tor to get out of. But with regimes where hey, there might be a crackdown on internet because of something that's going on, protests. Arab Spring is a perfect example of that. So some people do rely on Tor for really serious stuff. Now, basically in the vulnerability world, there are basically exploit brokers, and these are guys that will pay literally millions of dollars for a way to de-anonymize or to discover who the person actually is making these requests through Tor, to basically be able to de-anonymize. So I'm not a big fan of these guys because they will buy these exploits and you really have no idea who they're selling them to, what they're actually being used for once they sell them. There's been cases in the past of companies like this have been caught selling to countries where this kind of stuff is explicitly it's forbidden to sell to those countries by international law. So you can't really trust that these guys aren't doing that. They'll always say they're not, but when they get hacked, we find out the real story. So these guys basically, new version of the Tor browser bundle 8.0 came out recently. So this particular exploit, which was incredibly trivial, like beyond trivial, they basically these guys just dumped it on Twitter because they've already made their money from it. They easily paid $1 million for this exploit when they first got it. And they likely used it for probably 8+ months, selling it to their various customers, governments, whatever, and who knows, what those governments are doing. Now, you can argue, yeah, there's some shady shit that goes down on Tor, and we want to stop some of that, we want to monitor it, but at the same time, there's people who rely on Tor and can, So yeah, they literally just dumped it in a tweet. This is $1 million vulnerability in a tweet in 20 characters tops, right? That's $1 million of code right there. No word of a lie.
Yep.
And yeah, so apparently there was a new one that literally I just saw the CVE for as I was on the train. Apparently there's a slight bypass for it in 8 that is now already fixed.
Wow. So,
yeah.
What this exploit did was basically bypassed. By default, the Tor browser bundle has no script installed, so you can't run JavaScript because that's one of the ways of IDing and fingerprinting a browser, and maybe from there determining where you are. That little chunk of code basically allowed someone to bypass the no script implementation and run JavaScript on the node using the Tor browser bundle. So by bundling that into the content type request of the HTML page allows you to run JavaScript. Yep. Unreal.
Yeah.
This is something we see from time to time, and it's always worth mentioning just when we see it. Not necessarily as a name and shame thing, but just as bad security practice. In the industry, we would call this an anti-pattern, meaning this is a bad thing that you should not do, but people think it makes them more secure. When you disable the ability to paste into the password box of a website, people think it makes that safer for some reason because I'm now forced to type in my password. No, you're a jerk. You've kept me from using my password manager to automatically populate that with a secure, complex 24-character password. So Capital One, apparently, their customer login site did not allow pasting into the password field, which prevented password managers from working. That's horrible.
And they claim it's for security reasons.
Yeah. So,
which is, again, the opposite of really what should be doing.
Don't do that if you were thinking of it.
That's it's like old websites that used to try and block right-clicking so you couldn't view the source code.
Yeah. They wouldn't let you right-click, or the ones that don't let you right-click and save a picture, they're like, no, we're not going to let you do that. And then you hit print screen.
Yeah. So this week was Microsoft Patch Tuesday. For those of you not in the know, the second Tuesday of every single month, Microsoft dumps all of their security fixes for the month. With some exceptions, every once in a while, if there's something particularly bad that's public and going around and getting exploited, they'll do out-of-band patches. But so I mean, every month there's some interesting stuff. There's some widely exploited stuff. There's one that is basically just an image file.
It does. Viewing an image in a browser, in Explorer, doesn't matter. The built-in library that rendered that image type was exploitable. So a custom crafted image would basically give remote control.
And details of it are already public. So, again, now exploitation, even given something like this, is very difficult. You usually have to string together, 3, 4, 5 different bugs to actually get, running code on someone's computer. But it's not beyond.
Is this where you call out one of your coworkers?
Yeah.
For doing it good? They did it good? Yeah.
I've actually never met him. They work all over. They're remote.
So that was interesting. There was also a bug in Hyper-V that I guess lets you talk from the virtual machine down to the base.
Yeah. So virtualization bugs are really interesting because a lot of these like VPS services like DigitalOcean, Azure, AWS. They all run virtual machines. So like when they give you a machine, you're running a virtual machine on an actual machine. Now if you have an exploit where, hey, I can run code on the machine that's running my machine, well, you win because there's other people's stuff running on there and you can get access to it. So that's pretty dangerous.
Yeah, VM bugs are terrifying. They get patched pretty quickly, but they're also terrifying.
And then there's also there's some stuff that affects Internet Explorer. Yes, people still use Internet Explorer. A lot of people have to in the business world, in their on their company websites. You just don't have a choice. Their website literally is coded in such a way that it does not function on Chrome and Firefox. So there's always lots of stuff in there.
Yep.
Always for my work, this is usually one of the busiest weeks of the month, every month, because we have lots of work to do.
So this is interesting. I love the registers graphics. They're so awesome. Okay, so we used to have this problem early in the 2000s called the cold boot attack, where I could figure out your hard drive encryption keys if I had access to your laptop when it was off. We thought we fixed that problem basically by adding another component onto motherboards that basically said when you power off the machine, either the BIOS or the operating system is going to be in charge of wiping memory and getting rid of your hard drive decryption keys. Depending on which of those two processes was going to wipe memory, they would set a bit in this little piece of flash memory. And so on the subsequent boot, if the BIOS was told, oh, don't worry about clearing the key, the operating system took care of that, it would allow the system to boot and it wouldn't wipe the memory. So what a couple of researchers at ISSecure, is that what they're called? The one where, what's his name?
Miko,
yeah. ISSecure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What they found out is that, and this is obviously a contrived scenario, but if I go to your laptop before it's been shut down and I disassemble most of your laptop and I solder on a couple of wires to a particular hardware module on your motherboard, I can trick that thing into thinking the operating system wiped all your keys out of memory. Then you can power down your laptop, and then when you go to boot it up again, those keys will still be present in memory because the BIOS thought that the operating system wipes the keys out of your memory, and then I can get access to them, and then I can decrypt your hard drive. That's an insanely contrived scenario, and it would be obvious that someone disassembled your laptop and soldered crap onto your mother.
Forensics,
Yeah,
law
totally.
enforcement.
No, of course. Like the idea is that a hardware mechanism that we thought was foolproof has been bypassed, which theoretically is interesting. Is this ever going to happen?
But yeah, realistically, it's a bit ridiculous. It's like when researchers said that, I think it was like the Amazon Echo or Google Home was completely owned. It was because they had physically pulled it the fuck apart and like did a bunch of stuff to the insides. Yeah. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, when you do that, like
when you change
you
hardware,
might be able to do something, right?
But anyways, cool research is always just cool research. So it's cool to figure out learn something about that.
If someone steals the laptop, then they can do this if they really want.
If it was still powered on.
Yeah.
Yeah. So. Well, how many people put their computer to sleep?
Yeah, a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, I mean, there are attacks that are, again, like on paper, this is possible, right?
Yeah.
It's just unlikely. British Airways got hacked, and a whole lot of people had information taken, like names, credit card information, stuff like that.
Including like CVV and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they released today what was the actual cause of the breach. It was basically a cross-site scripting vulnerability because of a third-party JavaScript library that British Airways was using on their website for a baggage claim.
I'm going to be honest, this is probably the first big breach I've ever seen using a cross-site scripting vulnerability. Yeah. Because usually most cross-site scripting vulnerabilities are pretty shit.
Yeah. So
this is impressive.
Yeah, it was interesting. The article goes into detail, but we're already over on our time for news, so I'm just going to race through a few of these. The key fobs for the new Tesla Model S used crap crypto. So basically, you could, if you've captured 2 uses of the key and you have a pre-computed like rainbow table of hash values that takes up quite a number of terabytes. You can basically brute force the access key into a Tesla in 2 seconds.
40-bit MD5 or something?
Yeah, it was a really shitty crypto.
Yeah.
So it takes about 2 seconds to brute force the key and unlock the car. Yeah. So.
And it also affected McLaren and Triumph and one other manufacturer, and those 3 have not responded to any of the researchers' requests.
Yep.
Whereas Tesla will actually
do that.
Respond to this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So this technology has existed for a long time. Apparently people are just now finding out about it though, or maybe it's being applied to closed circuit television camera footage instead. We've always had skin tone recognition software. The cops have used that for ages and ages and ages to detect pornography. But now IBM used a whole bunch of New York Police Department closed circuit camera footage to develop an algorithm and an application that will scan video in real time and allow the police to search video feeds by skin color.
That can't possibly be used for anything
No.
bad, can it?
Certainly not in the United
no
States.
Way.
No, definitely
not in the U.S. by New York police.
No. When we turn off the microphone, I'll tell you about it. Also, apparently Google sent out an email to a bunch of users saying that, hey, we think you're the target of an FBI investigation. There's more detail in the Reddit thread about people reporting the email that they got. You can go read about that if you want. Interesting. I like when companies notify people that law enforcement is like looking into them. That's nice to know. Okay, let's have a short break, and then John's going to do his presentation. Yay! Yay! How do I? I'm going to stop this feed for now.
So I don't have OBS.